all awake for the last hour and a half. What we're going to do, the format of this last panel is I will introduce the speakers, I'll give a 3-minute scene setter, and then we're going to do a crossfire discussion of questions related to the genocide issue. Within that, Maria is going to do a PowerPoint presentation. We'll get back into the crossfire discussion, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions and answers. We may end up at 5 o'clock, but if you guys are really invigorated with lots of questions, we'll keep going. So to begin with the intro of the speakers, you've had a long introduction of Stephen Rapp. He's still Stephen Rapp. Bill Shavis has already been introduced, as has Maria Short. Who hasn't been introduced yet is my friend and colleague David Crane behind me. David Crane has had a long and illustrious history, starting out as a JAG and working his way up as a lawyer through the military ranks. He was Inspector General of the Department of Defense. He was Assistant General Counsel of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was Dean of the U.S. JAG School when I met him. He was Chief Prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, the first American to hold a Chief Prosecutor position of an international tribunal since Robert Jackson. He is now a professor at Syracuse Law School, but most importantly for his friends at Case Western, he teaches every year at our Summer Abroad program, teaches a class called Atrocity Law and Policy. And a few years ago, he got an honorary degree from our university. So this is his first time up. Why don't you join me in welcoming David. So the scene setter for this panel on whether Katyn was genocide, I think it's useful to tell you a little bit about the history of the Genocide Convention, very briefly. It was about 62 years and 2 months ago that the UN adopted the Genocide Convention, and today it has 140 parties. After decades of dormancy and pretty much irrelevance, the Genocide Convention has become an important legal tool in the international effort to end impunity for the worst crimes known to humankind. Both the term genocide and the convention were the byproducts of the atrocities of Nazi Germany that we've been describing today. Winston Churchill called Hitler's final solution, quote, the crime without a name. And Professor Raphael Lemkin, who I found out recently was a professor for a while at Duke University, my alma mater, he coined the term genocide by combining the Greek word genos, race, with the Latin word side, or side, for killing. The new word was not included in the Nuremberg Tribunal's charter. It was not one of the crimes that Nuremberg had jurisdiction over. However, it was included in the indictments. And in his closing argument, the French prosecutor stated, quote, this is a crime so monstrous, so undreamt of in history, that the term genocide had to be coined to define it. When the UN General Assembly adopted the Nuremberg Principles in 1946, it specifically declared genocide to be an international crime, and it directed that a treaty aimed at its prevention and punishment be negotiated. The negotiating history of the Genocide Convention has been a subject of Bill Shavis's books. One of the important things about it for our purposes is that during the negotiation, the Soviet Union insisted on the exclusion of political groups from the definition of genocide, which is giving, for example, the Cambodia Tribunal fits in trying to prosecute the crime for the old Pol Pot Khmer Rouge regime, and it might make it difficult in the context that we're going to be discussing. The convention defines genocide as a series of enumerated acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. It renders genocide a crime under international law. It requires state parties to undertake to prevent genocide, to punish those accused of perpetrating such acts, and it confirms that official position is not a defense. With that introduction, let's begin our crossfire with the first question, and that is, panelists, why is labeling the Katyn genocide, or the Katyn incident genocide, I'm putting the cart before the horse, why is labeling Katyn a genocide seen as so important? And related to that, I wonder if you'll comment on whether there are parallels to the debate about whether the Armenian massacres should be called genocide. Care to weigh in?
Sure. I thought about this issue, of course, of the Armenians. I think the Poles have a big advantage over the Armenians, is that at least now the Russians have admitted it, which the Turks haven't done yet. As for the issue of the legal interest and the significance of labeling it genocide, aside from the sort of the symbolism of it, which is very important to people, there are legal consequences, and I think that underpins it all. In the debate between the Turks and the Armenians, everybody's thinking about their legal positions, and there are some interesting legal consequences. The first one is whether the Genocide Convention could apply to events in 1940, or whether it could apply to events in 1915. The convention is silent on the question of its temporal application. It was adopted in 1948. There's a rule of interpretation in the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties that says that treaties are deemed to be prospective unless the content or the context suggests otherwise. But there are lots of interesting arguments to suggest otherwise. And that could mean, aside, again, from the other question of whether or not you can actually get it to stick in terms of the facts, that what happened at Katyn in 1940 would be a genocide within the meaning of the convention, within the narrow definition of the convention. If the convention itself can be deemed to apply to events in 1940, that means that Poland could take Russia to the International Court of Justice under the Genocide Convention for example, failure to investigate and for responsibility for the crime. So it's not without interest, certainly. And the other thing about the Genocide Convention, as opposed to the other categories of crimes which we can use to categorize Katyn, is that the convention does leave the door open to the International Court of Justice, to the World Court. These are not for individual prosecutions. This is for state-to-state litigation. So it's an interesting argument. There are strong views on both sides. The International Court of Justice, in one opinion in the case between Bosnia and Serbia in 1996, referred to the absence of a temporal provision in the Genocide Convention, and it reiterated this in 2008 in the case of Croatia versus Serbia, but without any more detail. It just said the convention doesn't say anything limiting the temporal scope, but whether that would mean we could go back before 1948 is an interesting question. It's, by the way, a good argument to use in negotiating a settlement, too.
Stephen, let me ask a wrinkle on this, and then we'll get to you as well, David and Maria. When I was at the State Department in the Office of Legal Advisor during the Bosnia, what we now call genocide, there were big debates about whether it should be labeled genocide. And then when Rwanda took place, again, the United States didn't want to call it a genocide. And then when Darfur took place, the whole world is debating whether it's genocide or not. Why is it the label so politically powerful? And what are the political implications for calling an incident genocide and calling Katyn genocide?
Well, I mean, first of all, keep in mind that the name of the convention is the Convention for the Punishment and Prevention of Genocide. And if you look at the provisions, there is a requirement that the state parties act to prevent a genocide. And so the question that when you have these situations is in Yugoslavia or Rwanda, if you find it a genocide, then the question is, what are you doing to stop it? And the sort of ideas require, putting boots on the ground, taking very difficult decisions. And so because of that, there's this tendency on the part of some to try to say, well, it's not quite there, or we can't say. It was frankly a little easier to make those kinds of comments back before these international tribunals got into business, and the Rwanda court, we indicted 90 people for genocide, and practically everybody who's been convicted so far has been convicted of that crime, and famously in in the Yugoslavia tribunal, genocide attempted in many cases as a charge, but established only in regard to Srebrenica, that the murder of 8,000 Muslim men and boys by Bosnian Serb forces was the crime of genocide, and one individual was found convicted of complicity in it several years ago, and just a few months ago, several other individuals explicitly of genocide for that. So it does have, now we know more clearly what a genocide looks like. On the other hand, there's still some ambiguities in it. We'll talk about those in a little bit, but I do want to emphasize that from a symbolic point of view, this is a very powerful thing, and many groups that have had horrendous victimization, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of victims, immediately say this is an extremely grave mass atrocity. It's therefore a genocide. If you go to Phnom Penh and you discussed the Cambodian court and dealing with the genocide issue and the challenge for the prosecutors, you'll find that this center where 15,000 people were tortured into making confessions of essentially of treason is called the Genocide Museum. But of course the crime, and to a large extent, though there were targeted Muslims because they were particularly unwilling to submit to control by this communist state, was political. They destroyed people because of their pursuit of this utopian ideology, this desire to take the country back to year one. So it doesn't look like the mass crime was a genocidal crime. If you go to Bangladesh, as I was there 3 weeks ago, and I've never been, it was a very intense four-day period. I was staked out by 50 reporters everywhere I went to ask about my views on how to prosecute the Bangladesh genocide. But of course, this was a crime that largely involved, at this point, Bangladeshis killing Bangladeshis. Because of a perception that particular individuals were supporting national independence. And so everywhere you go, you find people saying, it's got to be genocide, it's got to be genocide, because somehow it doesn't matter if it's not. Well, the one point I want to make, and we can get into the Katyn question, because I think it's a really important one from a legal standpoint. But from a moral standpoint, if you murder 2 million or 3 million people as part of a widespread and systematic attack on political grounds or whatever the grounds are as part of that widespread and systematic attack, if it's a part of a plan or policy, that is a crime against humanity of enormous proportion, as grave or graver than someplace else where far fewer have been killed in a genocide. And so I think we've always got to be careful not to say, well, genocide is always the most grave, because sometimes the numbers of victims and the heinous nature of the offenses, et cetera, constitute other crimes. And given the circumstances, they're as grave, but because of the legal definitions that we have in the Genocide Convention, we can't call it that.
And David, what's your take?
Well, I think Steve brings up a very good point here, particularly dealing with the politics of all of this. I've written about this called semantic indifference. What does it matter? 2 million by genocide, 2 million by crime against humanity, whatever it's called. It's still an atrocity which needs to be dealt with. And it's interesting, are we developing, I asked this rhetorically, are we developing a tier system related to our international crimes? Genocide seems to ring a little bit more harsh than, let's say, a war crime or a crime against humanity. And from a diplomatic and a political point of view, there's always legal ramifications if you invoke the G word because of obligations. And also just the way the public reacts to it. If we call it the Katyn atrocity or the Katyn event, does that cause people to step over it? It's an issue. So if we call it the Katyn massacre or the Katyn genocide, or call it a genocide, people tend to perk their ears up a little bit more. And the only reason I'm making this point is that we have to be very cautious about, in the real world, of how people react to an event, that we're careful as to how we describe it, because if we describe it wrongly in this 24-hour news cycle, something that needs to be addressed may just be pushed aside and the next news cycle happens.
And Maria, in your context, why is it so important at the end of the day that Katyn be labeled a genocide?
Well, from the Polish standpoint, if I may, Poland has been partitioned 4 times within the past 200 years, since the 18th century. 3 times by Russia, Prussia, and Austria, and the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact is being considered as the 4th partition of Poland. So Poland has been denied the right to live and the right to exist at least 4 times in the recent history by her 2 powerful neighbors. And I think Poland today doesn't have the atomic weapon to defend itself. But Poland can't defend itself for the future on the moral ground. That moral ground is that weight that the word genocide carries with it. Because Poland was subjected to genocide, and not once. And we are entitled to that moral defense to protect our future as a country.
With that as an introduction, Maria, why don't you come up and start your PowerPoint presentation and show us, this is the case of Maria the prosecutor for why Katyn should be considered genocide, and then our panel, I'm sure, will critique it.
We're blocking the...
With such a
I think.
distinguished panel. I don't know, let's see. F5, yeah, no? Okay, I think I'm getting
Jim will be
this.
here in a second if you don't.
If I don't manage that. I think I'm getting there.
There we go.
Okay, and I need to switch to the presentation mode, and I don't even have my, okay, very good. Okay, well, thank you for listening. So this is the traditional definition of genocide, original language from the 1948 definition that was subsequently adopted by the Statute of Rome of 2002. And my argument will be based on this classic definition. The elements of the crime to the Statute of Rome with respect to the killings, because we have 5 different types of acts that constitute genocide. One of them is killings, and I will be focusing primarily on the killings, but of course I will be referring to other acts that also constitute genocide, which are relevant. So those are we need to establish that people, perpetrator killed, and that was a protected group, and I will limit my approach to 3 protected groups, which is national, ethnic, and religious. And we need to meet the high standard to prove that the perpetrators killed members of the protected group with the intent to destroy that group, specific intent. And we need to look at the evidence of that specific intent in the context of facts and circumstances, and also in the manifest pattern of similar conduct now, before, and after. So I don't want to spend much time on the fact of killing, because that has been proven, and I assume that this is the easy component of the crime that the Katyn crime meets. Now, the issue of the question is whether the people killed pursuant to the March 5th, 1940 execution order, which was drafted by Beria, approved by Stalin, and adopted by the Politburo, whether that document represents a proof that those people intended to kill the Polish national group. And I'm quoting here the language from that specific order. I took the liberty to put in bold the quotes from the March 5th order, and the original full text is in your text, because I apologize for taking this out of the context, but we do have it in the conference material, the full order, because we need to understand it in its entirety. But this is critically important. With respect to the officers, 14,736, they were specifically spelled out in that order that more than 97% Polish by nationality. Straightforward. Now, even we have proof that before determining this 97%, Beria requested a report on the nationality of the Polish prisoners of war. And based on that report, he came to that conclusion and he put it into that death order. Now, the second group, those are regarding the prisoners of war. The second group of 7,300 civilians that were sentenced to death by the same document. What this order is saying that currently in the prisons we have 18,632 people, okay? And out of this number, we know that 10,685 are Poles, okay? So below the last quote, I ordered to execute 11,000 of them. There is a correlation between the 10,685 and 11. Whether this is a correlation that the court would admit or not, I don't know, but I'm submitting that as evidence. Now, the case law, I was trying to do my best to research the national group. I think most of the modern cases relate to the ethnic groups as opposed to national groups. But there is some, I found some relevant language. And what's critically important in my opinion is that there is a prevailing view that the way the court looks at the definition of the national group is not whether it really was purely a Polish national group, but how the perpetrator perceived that group in the moment of killing it. So in other words, it's not the objective component, but a subjective component. So I would argue that if they put 97% Poles by nationality, that meets the standard of national group, which is the protected group under the Genocide Convention. So in that sense, we meet the requirement, the element of the crime that this was directed at the Polish national group, which is the protected group under the under the Genocide Convention and the Statute of Rome. Of course, we can argue about the scope. In other words, whether to kill 25,000 Polish officers was enough to destroy the Polish national group. I already talked about the fact that this was only one of the components because we had a huge deportation policy going at the same time, impacting hundreds of thousands of Polish nationals. So I don't want to spend too much time on this element because I also believe that the law of genocide doesn't require the group to be destroyed, because what is important is an attempt to destroy that group, and not the fact how much they managed to destroy, during the time they had the opportunity. Because we have to remember that the deportations were interrupted by the Nazi aggression, and we don't know how many more waves we would have. So I'm considering that the requirement to destroy in whole or in part is also met. Now, the question of intent. This is the most difficult part and the most challenging in proving any genocide, I understand. We need a specific intent. So in other words, we need to prove to the court that those people who signed the death order, they specifically intended to destroy the Polish national group. And how can we do this? We can do it the easy way when they actually say that, okay? That's the direct proof. And then we can prove it indirectly. But when we prove it indirectly, we have to deal with the question of motive, which is a very critical issue here. But first I want to show you some straightforward proof. And I want to give you some quotes. The first statement Stalin made in 1937 when he was exterminating they called them Soviet Poles, because the Polish people lived on those lands for 1,000 years. And when Poland was reborn after partitions in 1918, many Polish people were left outside the new Polish borders, and they found themselves in the Soviet Union. So Stalin took aim at those Polish nationals during the so-called Polish operation between 37 and 38. And he killed incredible number of those people perceived as Poles, because it was enough to be a friend with a Pole to be already endangered. Not necessarily the Pole, but the collaborator. So what Stalin, Jerzów was in charge of the Polish operation, and he sent Stalin some reports how many he killed, how many portraits, because he sent portraits, like books of those exterminated. So he sent those portraits, like a couple thousands, to Stalin, and Stalin replied, and this is great, very well, keep on digging up and cleaning up this Polish filth. Eliminate it in the interest of its Soviet Union. I think this is straightforward, but this is 37, okay? Now, when they were negotiating the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, on the August 18, remember, the pact was signed on the 23rd of August 39, Ribbentrop-Molotov. On the 19th, Stalin had a meeting with his bosom buddies, with his Politburo people, and he said to them, and there is a record of that, it was published in the German press, in fact, and that's the quote from that, what he said. The first benefit from signing the pact, meaning the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, will be the destruction of Poland and the movement of our borders up to Warsaw. That's a really good deal. The other statement I want to bring to your attention is the fact that when they signed the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, they said that basically they agreed to divide Poland between themselves, but they left open the option of leaving some residual state, because there were so many Polish people that no one really wanted them. So they thought maybe we can leave some small place when all those people will be congregated there, the ones that we don't want. But Stalin was the first one to alert Ribbentrop. Molotov conveyed to Ribbentrop in September that Stalin came to the conclusion that there is no reason to left any residual Polish state. So it was Stalin who decided that there shouldn't be any Poland. Of course, the fact that the execution order from March 5th has a specific language, using special procedure, apply to them supreme punishment, by execution by shooting. Okay, straightforward, intent to destroy. I want also to mention that there's a famous saying of Molotov on October 31st, when he referred to this unwanted child of the Versailles Treaty, but he put it much strongly than that. So those are direct proofs. Now let's go to what's critically important is the motive. Because the greatest objection to calling Katyn genocide is the argument, well, those people were killed not because they were the Poles, but because they were anti-communists. And this is the motive is absolutely the understanding of the motive. During the legislative work, there was a big struggle in coming up with the language of the definition. The Soviet Union wanted to list the motives for genocide and wanted to limit those motives. So in other words, if you kill for national, religious, or ethnic motives, that's what constitutes genocide. But if you kill for political motives, which is the big one, or for economic motives, or for personal motives, that's not a genocide. That was the Russian position. The British position was no. that's not right, because such a restrictive nature of the motives enables those who commit a crime of genocide to claim that they had not committed that crime on grounds other than the motives listed that the Soviets wanted to list. So it was clearly envisioned as a way out, as a pretext to cover up genocide. And they couldn't agree on that, and finally Venezuela came with the solution to reconcile the position, and they said this: okay, why don't we, instead of listing the motives, we use the words as such, and those words will mean that we do consider motives, but we do not list them, and we do not limit them. Okay, and basically that was adopted. That was the position that was adopted, that is in the definition of the Genocide Convention. It's critically important. It's absolutely critically important to the argument that is being made today that Katyn is not a genocide because it was committed for political reasons. Here are some statements from the countries negotiating the Genocide Conventions. And it's really nice to read it because it's a core problem that we have. And I think this really requires attention. Those who commit the crime of genocide may use the pretext of political opinion of a national, racial, or religious group to destroy it without becoming liable for international sanctions. Then another statement: a mention of motive is dangerous because it allows the guilty to exonerate themselves. So basically, this really was predicted by the legislators, by the creators of the Geneva Convention, Genocide Convention, that this position of the Soviet Union originally was aimed at way out of genocide. So we have a manipulation of the motive. Perfect proof in the preparation for the Polish aggression, when the Nazi and the Soviets were planning the Polish aggression. The Soviets came with the argument first that we will come to the aid of our Ukrainian and Belarusian brothers to defend them from Germany. And the Germans said, oh no, we don't like that language, okay? So then the Soviets said, okay, we understand your sensitivity on this issue, so we will no longer say that we are coming to protect you against Germans. So they dropped that language, okay? So, but they did not resolve, they are coming to protect the Belarusians and Ukrainians against whom? And it was brilliant, because they actually said that they are coming to protect Ukrainians and Belarusians. And many Polish people felt that they are coming to protect the Slavic people against the German aggression. Either the Soviet soldiers thought that, and many Polish soldiers thought that, and they thought that they are coming as friends to help the Poles. You see? And only later it came out that they came to protect Belarusians and Ukrainians against the Poles. That was really brilliant, because that was really, that imprecise language enabled them to mix the national motives and the political motives and to cover up their real intentions. It was very misleading also for the Polish government. And the British ambassador at the time, I want to point to the last statement, the Soviet Union will be able to at any time switch from the defense of persecuted brothers to defense of oppressed victims of capitalism. And that's really what happened, because once it became obvious that the Soviet army came to obliterate the Poles, then the question was why? And that was a handy political argument, because all those Poles are anti-communist, capitalist, Catholics, religious guys, and we just hate them. I mean, religion component is very important, because the Poles are Catholics and the Belarusians and Ukrainians are Orthodox religion. So there is a split on religion on that. So this was a brilliant strategy to be imprecise, and this has been even found in some specific directives. Now I want to go to the question is, the March 5th, the execution order, does that give us a clue of a motive? Did they spell out the motive, why they wanted to kill those 25,000 Polish officers? And basically the key motive is, they are saying that we are sentencing them to death basically because they are hardened, irremediable enemies of the Soviet power. Here we really don't see the motive clearly. It's not obvious. But then in other places of the language that this order uses, we have a group, former officers of the Polish army, former workers of the Polish police, and intelligence organs. This is clearly geared towards the Polish state, the workers and representatives of the Polish state, national motive. And then they use the phrase, various phrases, like very popular in this order and in many other documents. They call those enemies nationalist counter-revolutionary. And you have two components here, okay? Nationalist and counter-revolutionary. National motive and political motive together. They say anti-Soviet agitation, counter-revolutionary work. At the same time, national and anti-communist. So clearly the motives are mixed. But the courts clearly said, let me see. I think I probably moved, because what is critically important, because I think I skipped, I lost somewhere on the way, the concept of a mixed motive. Okay, and there is a clear law on the point that as long as we have a national motive or a genocidal motive, we may have many other motives and it doesn't matter, okay? As long as we find that national motive, then whether we have political or whether we have very big political or many political, doesn't matter, because we need just a proof of a national motive, and we do have that. Now, we need to, so that's my analysis of the motive. And clearly the national motive is present, it's spelled out, and it is being proven in many instances. But I want to go also to the facts and circumstances, the so-called indirect proof of genocide. Indirect proof, so in other words, from facts and circumstances, can we determine that the goal was, the aim was at the Polish national group? And of course, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact talks about this clearly. We also have this whole problem of the Katyn massacre in the context of the war of aggression. And in the criminal law and in the international law and in the law of genocide, this is a critically important context of this crime. And we also have, we must remember the secret protocol to the Friendship and Boundary Treaty from September 28, when the Soviets and the Nazis spell out their intent to suppress on their territories the agitation and resistance of the Polish national group. Not only that, but to inform each other concerning suitable measures. And they did cooperate very closely with each other to actually coordinate their action of exterminating Polish people, both on the Nazi side of the occupied Poland and on the Soviet side. I will not go into the details of that because Mr. Kenneth Ledford touched upon this issue very nicely in his presentation, so I will be skipping that. I only point out one thing, that at the time there were 4 meetings, top-level meetings between the invasion of Poland and the Katyn massacre. There were regular meetings of the top officials from Russia, from the Soviet Union and Germany on the conquered Polish territory to coordinate their action. What they did, we don't know, because the documents do not exist. We only have certain documents from the Polish underground, which is a secondary documents. So whatever they did, the fact is that Hitler authorized the so-called extraordinary pacification action, called as AB Intelligentsia action, on March 2nd, yes, on March 2nd, 1940, and Katyn authorized, Stalin authorized Katyn killings on March 5th. Actually, he made that decision on March 2nd, according to Professor Lebedeeva in her group. The same timing. Okay, so basically, hatred, absolutely plenty of proof of hatred, and I don't have time to go to it. This is the illustration. This eagle, that's Poland. And Sovietization of the Polish lands occupied by the Soviet army, Polish language banned, Polish teachers thrown out, Polish books burned, Polish monuments destroyed. Kidnapping of Polish children, unknown story, but I just discovered one. This is just the scratching of the surface. Manifest pattern of similar contact, I will only mention that the Polish operation of 1937 preceded the Katyn killings, and then we have plenty of genocidal action in Poland after 1944, including the so-called Augustów operation, which is called a little Katyn or a small Katyn, which clearly meets the standards of genocide as well. Okay, with that, thank you very much.